It's so healthy, and I think one of the things that sometimes we lose sight of is even as adults, we get caught up in social media too, and then that's what we're modeling.
Mm-hmm.
So we almost have to rewire our own relationship to social media. And then we model that to those around us. And I think, it's a space where it's impacted couples.
Mm-hmm.
They're often saying that what's happening in their relationship is you'll have someone on their phone and they're just right on Facebook. They may be trying to have a date night or a dinner, but someone's like really busy, like on their phone, capturing that they're having the date night and dinner versus actually connecting with their partner.
Yeah.
So I think it's showing up, right? It's showing up with kids. It's also showing up for adults in a big way too.
I love that. It's so true because connection is important. Being here with you is important, and being with my friends and putting our phones down. I love that you say that because I believe in that so much, and that's just a good time to put the phones down and be with those that you love.
Really sitting in that experience, even small things, even if let's say it's just you and yourself, like putting it away. And it's something so simple. It says, can I take 5 minutes and take in the sunshine? Can I take a half an hour and just breathe and enjoy my cup of tea or whatever I'm having and notice it?
Yeah.
There really is something about mindfulness and just noticing those things and sort of slowing down.
Absolutely.
Do we see ourselves as part of a unit or a team, right? And really leaning into that and to say, for example, hey, when you keep looking at social media, I feel like I'm not so interesting. I feel like you're not present with me. I'm wondering if we could do something about that together. Perhaps I'm doing it too. What does that feel like to you? And I think there's so much here that we can learn from around having those conversations, and maybe not just with social media, but let's look at the space just around language and the way we lean in and the way we speak to each other, right? If we think about relationship work or even in the workplace. And how are we actually leaning in with empathy? And the greatest of leaders now are taking that into account and saying, how do we bring empathy into the workplace? How do we bring empathy into our lives?
Yeah, I was just talking about that with the last lady that was here, just about compassion. Learning to be compassionate and to have that for those around you.
That's such a great topic, and I would imagine really helpful when we think about comparisons that come up in terms of social media. If we think about these dating platforms and people trying to connect and meet people on them, and having some compassion to yourself because it's so easy to compare.
Yes.
And that's taking a toll on mental health as well, because there's a comparison of that there's so many individuals out there and feeling so rejected. And we really just have to show compassion and say, okay, I am a unique individual here. And if I want to meet someone, I'm going to be very focused, right? That the comparisons and then showing some of that empathy, it does come up in the space right now with technology and with individuals that are seeking, perhaps a relationship and feeling like there's so much comparison and not feeling good enough.
Right. Oh, absolutely. And I think when I was telling you that earlier about seeing all these families, that's what I was doing. I was comparing myself, not thinking I was, good anymore or what, or failure because I didn't have the man in the picture with me and my children, And it's just, it is about having compassion on yourself and really in times, and it's hard to do. I mean, I still every day am learning, hey, be compassionate on yourself, love yourself. It's okay.
Yeah, that the first person we need to really truly love is ourselves, and then that love can shine out. And I think you're absolutely right in that space post-divorce or post-breakup after a long-term relationship, there is a lot of comparison. There's a lot of sadness around the story that we thought we would have. And then seeing others have that story and being happy for them, but wondering, like, where did I go wrong? Or right, and feeling like, what are people going to think, going back to that experience? You know, from my lens, you know, I like to be able to say, remember that each story is unique, and maybe that story that you thought was going to take place didn't happen, but you have a new one to create. And you're going to get there, and it may be difficult, and there are going to be some uncomfortable feelings to sit with, right? And you're going to sit with them. But ultimately, the story doesn't need to be that traditional, right, family picture. Because there's so much out there, in terms of your community and your friendship, etc., that still exists.
Absolutely. It's so true. And you get to go and explore, you know, things that maybe you stopped exploring because you're in a relationship. You know, you just get to know yourself again.
You really do. I mean, all the things, that you push aside, or you think, I can't because I need to be doing this, or the things that you give up. I think it is ultimately ends up being an opportunity. It just takes time to get there, right? But ultimately, I know with the clients that I work with, they do ultimately say, everything has changed, but I am more me than I ever have been. And I am so much happier, and I can see even what I need to own. I can see like what I perhaps didn't lean into, and I can actually even see some of my own mistakes, and that is okay too.
Yeah, wow.
And now I can truly be me and enjoy my life and love it and love myself.
Yeah, that's powerful. It really is. Now, Babita, you have transitioned out of the corporate world, but are still in it with the work that you do. How do you find that CEOs and executives are coping with their own mental health these days?
You know, what I'm finding is that they're paying more attention to it. I've definitely had a lot of reach outs and work with several CEOs and executives, either in coaching or mental health consulting for themselves and their departments, or individual therapy. And I believe what's happening is they are recognizing that their own mental health journey and their story, and understanding that better, does end up sort of projecting out in terms of how they lead. And so what's going on in the work is they're really leaning into understanding themselves better personally, and recognizing some of their own patterns, so they can make a difference and be even that much more of a great leader. If they're vulnerable in that space, which I'm noticing is like the space is opening up, and there's a lot more vulnerability in the work that they're doing in the therapeutic journey or coaching, they are able to then bring that to the table. And what they're circling back to me with is, wow, that session was so impactful that it made me rethink, am I being empathic enough? Am I looking at sort of my own history enough to realize that there's something coming up for me in this space in terms of how I'm leading? And the beauty about all of this is that they're also then, as leaders, because of their journey, trying to normalize it in the workplace. So I also think what's happening is the more they're being vulnerable, the more they're diving into their stuff, the more they want to bring it into their corporations or their organizations and normalize it and bring it into either employee benefit, or do things like, I'm going to put something down in the newsletter to share around, right, if individuals are struggling or feel challenged, or if they want to build relationships, and how to do that from a place of empathy, etc. Those are the kinds of things, Julie, that are happening.
You know, we had Art Acevedo on here, and he was the police chief in Austin and then Houston, and then went to Miami. And he talked about his own mental health journey and why it was so important and why he started bringing more, opportunities for police officers to talk about their mental health, and therapists and other ways, and people that actually go into the homes that are not police officers but are professionals who can help, talk others down. And he was so vocal about it, so open, and, said that he talked about this with the people that he was with. He was very open about his mental health journey. And I'm telling you, I don't know a person, I've never met a person here in Austin that hasn't said he was like the best police chief, and in Houston, because my parents live there. And I think the reason people say that is because exactly what you're saying. A police chief doesn't need to be macho and can't handle things. It's okay to be vulnerable. And it sounds like that's what you're saying is happening right now in the corporate world.
Yes, and thank you for sharing that. I'm going to have to watch that episode.
Yeah.
Because that, it takes a lot to be able to put that out there. And being vulnerable is being strong and brave. It really is, isn't it?
Yeah. How are people coping today in corporate America?
In corporate America today, this is something I'd like to say when I speak about stuff in corporations, there's a lot of pressure around high performers. And what's happening is because of all that pressure, people leaning into unhealthy coping mechanisms and not even realizing that they're leaning into unhealthy coping mechanisms. And that it's so important to be able to to really check in on burnout, to check in on those unhealthy coping mechanisms.
Can you tell me what some of those unhealthy coping mechanisms are? And to our viewers, if they don't understand if they're experiencing those, but think they might be, what can they do?
Absolutely. So we have the ones that feel most obvious, which is really turning to alcohol and drugs and using that to escape because they are working extremely long hours and they feel so much pressure to perform. And so I'm not talking about the occasional, right? Social glass of wine, etc., but full on that they can't get through unless or function or perform unless they turn to drugs or alcohol. The second one is goes the next layer is it's impacting how they are navigating their relationships. So they are extremely stressed out and burnt out. They may not notice that they're shutting down, that they're actually not communicating as much when they're at home. They may also be isolating themselves more because they're so depleted. They may be avoiding having meaningful conversations. The third part is they're not leading into joy. So notice if you're feeling this way, if you're sleeping a lot, if you feel like things don't feel as happy anymore, or if you don't really quite know what that is, if you find yourself unable to really want to, except for work, do other things, or if you don't think that it's even important anymore, if you're noticing that you're not even thinking about, what do I want to do today? What makes me happy? What's bringing me joy? Another sign is this. If you are really just in the work mode, and I think this is happening a lot with remote work, you may not notice because you're just in front of your screen all day that you're actually not quite living your life except for work. So if you aren't noticing that, what's happening is in other spaces, notice if you're feeling a little short-tempered. Notice if you're feeling a little anxious. Notice if you aren't really able to sleep as much. Notice if you're not really knowing what your emotions are. Those are just some of the things. And the things that you can do is, I would say this. One, do I need to see a therapist? Two, maybe I want to look at ways in terms of helping myself and go into some sort of coaching around resilience and really thinking about what changes do I need to make in my life, and just start to take those steps. There's a great book called The One Thing, do one thing at a time until you get there. Also take a step back and say, look, maybe I need to reframe my story. Maybe I think I have to be like this or work like this because I think that's the only way I'm going to be successful. So take a step back and say, is there something I'm missing? And have those conversations with mentors. Or even go back to someone that you admire, that you think is modeling something that's healthy, that's doing what you do, and find out how they're doing it.
Yeah, that's great advice. Absolutely. And what have you seen since the pandemic that's so much different within corporate America?
I've seen a lot. I think a couple of things that have been real gems is that there is the flexibility in the workplace that is happening. A lot of times corporations felt that everyone had to be in person in order to do a good job and to do well and to lead. So I do want to bring in the positive. That's been a real positive in I call it the gem in the rubble, because the pandemic was clearly awful and we've had a lot of loss. And I do need to say that as I express this. But I've seen that. I've seen leaders take more interest in mental health in some corporations, maybe not all, and I think that that's really important. And I think the pandemic has brought that more to light. But what I also see is happening is there's been a bleeding of the personal and the professional, because hours have just rolled into each other. And so what started to happen is we've started to see less boundaries. People aren't being as mindful in corporations because everybody's just turning it on as soon as they get up, and they're just working all day. And people are just constantly accessible. So what might also be happening is we've become used to that kind of that accessibility.
Right.
So I would say that we've got, as an aerial view, some real gems, but then we also do have some things to work on in corporate America because of the pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely.
I do want to say one more gem in corporate America that is also happening, that's coming up with clients that I coach. They're starting to think about what's important to them. Some of them are saying, wait a second, the pandemic has taught me, what am I doing with my life? It's almost like the journey I went through non-pandemic, with the way we started our conversation today, when I said, I paused and said, what's going to make me happy? I feel stuck. The pandemic, if you've noticed that too, has really done that.
Yeah, it was a forced pause for a little longer than people anticipated. But yeah, it was. And I love how you say a gem in the rough, because there have been some, and it's hard for people to see sometimes, but really there have been.
Yes, there have been. So even though we've had a lot of trauma around it, people have been pulling what they can and say, wait a second, but I learned this and I did this. I acknowledge that there was some trauma, but here's the stuff that I did do or figure out.
Yeah. Okay, great. Thank you for that. I know one thing that you touch on is domestic abuse, and it's something I would really love to discuss with you. I know that would be a whole other episode. So can we have you on again?
Absolutely. Thank you so much for acknowledging that and realizing that, because I do believe it's a sort of a sacred topic that sort of for us to shift, right, into that space of really dialoguing about it. And I think another episode would be great to do that, and I would be happy to do that because it is so relevant and so important.
Thank you. And thank you for coming on today.
Thank you for having me. So lovely to be here. Wonderful to be in Austin.
Yeah, and this is your first South by, right?
This is my first South by.
Well, welcome, and your first time in Austin. So welcome to Austin, and we would love to have you back.
Thank you. I'd love to be back.
Okay, great. Thank you for joining us at Speak as One, and I want to thank Babita Spinelli for being here with us. And if you want to watch her story and others, please go to speakasone.com or our YouTube channel at Speak as One. Subscribe, like, and share with your friends, and we will see you next week.